all these voices. All these voices, all these things you can't explain, all these painful memories, they keep haunting you and daunting me. It's just a ghost of you and me. It's just a smoke and gasoline. It's just a ghost of you and me, of you and me. All these whispers, all these footsteps in the rain, all these shadows in my mind, with my reflection I can't find. It's just a ghost of you and me. It's just a smoke and gasoline. It's just a ghost of you and me, of you and me. Don't let them take you away. Don't let them bring you down inside. It's just the mirrors in your mind. Don't let them bring you down.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Staring into the Abyss. I am your host, horror author James Hershey Jr. And with me as always is old boy James Ash. How you doing, brother?
Pretty good. How you guys doing, misfits, sugar ladies, and demon hunters? I'm doing pretty good, brother.
On today's episode, we are going to be talking about lake monsters. And in particular, we're going to be talking about Nessie, who is probably the most well-known and best example of a lake monster. There's also a Champ from Lake Champlain. There's Ogopogo. There's a couple other ones, but Nessie's the main one. So we'll cover Nessie, and I want to go through a little bit of the photographic evidence today and discuss that. Some of which looks to be fairly good evidence, and some of it looks to be complete and total hoaxes. So we'll go through all of those, and then we'll kind of talk a little bit about Nessie and try to figure out, one, if this thing exists, and two, if it does, what the hell is it? So the first actual photograph of Nessie was taken on December 6, 1933. And it was taken by a guy named Hugh Gray. And the photograph was published in the Daily Express. And it caused kind of a stir, because the Secretary of State for Scotland saw the photograph in the Daily Express, and he ordered the police to prevent anybody from attacking the monster. He didn't want Nessie to be hurt or hunted down. In 1934, there was the famous picture that we've all seen that's called the surgeon's photograph. And that's the one that you see the neck and the head coming up. It's like a shadowy looking thing. That's the one that when you talk about Nessie, everybody knows that photograph. Now, that photograph we'll go into a little bit in when we go through the evidence. There are some problems with that photograph, and we'll talk about it. But the first picture was taken in 1933, but the actual accounts of this monster, the sightings, date all the way back to like the 6th century, where people have claimed to see this thing. The actual earliest report of the Loch Ness Monster appeared in the Life of Saint Columba, which was written by Adaman in the 6th century. And according to Adaman, the Irish monk Saint Columba was staying in the land of the Picts, and he encountered the local residents. They were burying a man by the river, okay, because Loch Ness has a little river they call the River Ness that feeds it. And he said that he encountered the local residents burying a man there. And he spoke with them, and they had explained that the man was swimming in the River Ness. and he was attacked by what they described as a water beast. And they said that this water beast mauled the man and then dragged him underwater. They tried to mount a rescue with a boat, but by the time they got to the guy, he was dead. And Columbus sent one of his followers to swim across the river and collect the guy. And he said that the beast approached him, but then Columba made the sign of the cross, and he said, and this is a quote, "Go no further, do not touch the man, go back at once." And he said once he said that and made the sign of the cross, the creature stopped and it took off. It like swam away. And then Columba's men gave thanks because they said it was like a miracle and all this. Now, this is the first ever mention of the Loch Ness Monster. Now, a couple of these that are coming up are going to happen in fairly rapid succession, and it's going to give us some interesting insight into what this thing possibly could be. Because, see, everybody views Nessie as a sea creature, basically, that's stuck in a lake. But you'll see as we talk about this a little bit that there are a lot of other characteristics that you're probably not familiar with. The next sighting was in 1871 by a guy named D. Mackenzie. He reportedly saw an object resembling a log or an upturned boat that was moving around in the water. He said that it moved slowly at first, and then when it disappeared, it went very quickly. He sent his story in a letter to Rupert Gold in 1934, and shortly after that is when Nessie really started becoming popular. In 1933, George Spicer and his wife saw what they described as, quote, a most extraordinary form of animal. And this is when it starts to get kind of interesting, because there's other characteristics of the animal that we just never heard before. And they said they saw it cross the road in front of their car. So this means that this creature is not just lake bound, that it can actually leave the water and move around. That is extremely important when we are trying to figure out what this thing could possibly be. Because there's a lot of theories on it being some kind of ancient dinosaur like a plesiosaur or something like that. So this will be very important when we get to that portion of the show. So just remember, and there's a couple of these accounts when we go through these, where they actually say they saw the animal out of the water moving around on land. They describe the creature as having a large body. They say it was about 4 foot with a long, wavy, narrow neck. They said the neck was slightly thicker than an elephant's trunk, and that it was around 10 to 12 feet long. The interesting thing about that is they said that they saw no limbs. So the creature didn't have any arms or legs, is what they're saying. And it kind of lurched its way across the road. It traveled about 20 yards because the loch was about 20 yards away from the road. So it crossed the road and traveled that distance to go into the water. In the beginning, it was a remote area, Loch Ness was. They began construction in that area around that time period, and there was always a little road there, but it wasn't a very passable road. So when they started doing the construction, they improved the road. And at that point, when the road was made better and more people began traveling there, that is when a lot of the sightings really started to pick up. And you started having a lot more eyewitness accounts. The next one is another photograph. It was taken by Hugh Gray in 1933. November 12th of 1933 to be exact. And this was the first photograph that was supposed to actually show the monster. It was a little bit blurry, and they say that if you examine the photograph closely, if you blow it up and mess with the contrast a little bit, that it looks like the head of a dog. Now, that's important because Gray had taken his dog, his Labrador, for a walk that day. And what the people that examined the photograph are thinking is that the photograph actually shows his dog fetching a stick from the loch. And they're thinking maybe because you can see the head of a dog when you blow it up, that it resembles the head of a dog. Maybe it's just an out-of-focus picture of him playing with his dog. Other people that have examined the photograph say that they think that it might be an otter or a swan. That's something that you'll hear a lot of from the skeptics that are trying to debunk any kind of photographic evidence of the Loch Ness Monster. Most times they say that it's either an otter or a swan or a school of fish or something along those lines, a log, something like that. You'll hear a lot of the same explanations from skeptics who don't believe. They'll say, no, it's just a log or it's just an otter or whatever. So take that kind of with a grain of salt. The original negative to the picture was lost. But in 1963, Maurice Burton came into possession of 2 of the slides, which were contact positives from the original negative. When he projected them on the screen, he says that it revealed an otter rolling at the surface in characteristic fashion. That also is up for interpretation, because what he saw, he believed looked like an otter, but it's not 100% verifiable, so we don't really know. On January 5th, 1934, this guy named Arthur Grant, who was riding a motorcycle, claimed that he nearly hit the creature while he was approaching the northeastern end of the loch. Now this is another one that says that Nessie was actually out on the road. Okay, this took place around 1 a.m. and he said that the moon was out that night. It was very bright, so he was able to see it very well. According to Grant, the creature had a small head that was attached to a very long neck. He said that the creature saw him and then darted back across the road into the loch. Now, Grant was a veterinary student, and he says that the creature to him looked like a cross between a seal and a plesiosaur. So this is the first time that the theory of the Loch Ness Monster being a plesiosaur entered the discussion. He said that he got off his motorcycle and he tried to follow the creature down to the water to see it again, but he only saw ripples, basically. He drew a sketch of what the creature looked like, and the same guy, Maurice Burton, the zoologist, he examined the sketch and he said that it was consistent with the appearance and behavior of an otter. Now, I have seen the sketch myself, and I will try to include the sketch in this video when we make the video for this show, and so you'll get to see it for yourself. In no way does this sketch resemble an otter at all to me. When I look at this sketch, I do not think otter. Honestly, when I look at this sketch, I think brontosaurus or some other form of dinosaur like that. That's what it looks like. It does not in any way look like an otter. I don't see how he can look at this and say otter, because otters don't have real long ass necks. They're not gigantic. I mean, this thing looks like something off the Flintstones. So to me, there's absolutely no way that anybody could realistically and logically look at this thing and say, oh yeah, that's an otter. You know, if you didn't even tell me what the sketch was from, if you just showed it to me and said, hey, what is this a picture of? What is this a drawing of? The very last thing in the world I would say would be otter. You know what I mean? I would say dinosaur before I would say anything, because that's what it looks like. And then if you pressed me, I wouldn't even say plesiosaur, because it doesn't look like a plesiosaur to me. A plesiosaur did not have feet. It had like flipper-like things on the end of its arms and legs. This thing has feet. It looks like something off the Flintstones, honestly. And so I definitely would not say otter. Now, he claims that most likely it was poor lighting and all that stuff, and the guy just mistook it. I don't buy it at all. The next piece of evidence is the famous surgeon's photograph I was talking about before, and this was taken April 21st of 1934. That's at least when it was first published in the Daily Mail. We're not exactly sure when it was actually taken, but that's when it was published. Now, the guy that published it was a guy named Robert Kenneth Wilson. He was a gynecologist in London. But the reason they call it the surgeon's photograph is because Wilson did not want to have his name associated with the picture, because he was a doctor, and he did not want his reputation to suffer from showing a picture of a mythical creature, basically. He knew that people would probably call him a crackpot, and he did not want his reputation to suffer. So he refused to have his name associated with it. So they just started calling it the surgeon's photograph. So that's what we know it as today. According to Wilson, he was looking at the loch and he saw the monster. Once he saw the monster, he grabbed his camera and he quickly tried to snap pictures. He ended up getting 4 pictures of it. Only 2 of the pictures that he took actually came out. The first was the picture that we're all familiar with. It shows the small head, the long neck, and a bit of the back. That's the one that everybody knows. The second picture also shows the head. Okay, it looks a lot like the head in the first picture, but it's in a diving position, and the rest of it is just blurry. So you can't really make out much other than the head in the second photo. The first photo became very well known. Everybody's seen it. The second photo was pretty much left in obscurity. Nobody really knows that it even exists, but it does. Now, for a great deal of time, that photo was considered the absolute best evidence of the Loch Ness Monster. Now, you had skeptics, and of course they dismissed it as either driftwood or an otter, a bird, all the normal thing. But it was considered by many people to be the best evidence. A couple of the problems with the picture was the scale. Nobody really knew how large the thing was, because the photo that we've all seen was cropped. So we never got to really see the original picture. So in the crop picture, it looks like it's a very large creature that is in the middle of the loch, and the ripples around it look like waves that are going across. So it looks like a very large creature that is displacing a great deal of water. The uncropped shot kind of shows something different. The uncropped shot shows the other end of the loch, and it shows the monster in the center. And the ripples in the photo that is uncropped, they don't look quite as impressive at all. They kind of look like real small ripples. They don't look like large waves like the crop photo that's zoomed in. So they did an analysis of that original image, and it started to raise a lot of doubt. In 1993, Discovery did a documentary called Loch Ness Discovered, and they actually analyzed the uncropped image, and they found a strange white object that was visible in every single version of the photo, which means basically that it was present on the negative. And they believed that that is what was causing the ripples. And to them, and the experts that examined it for the show, they said that it looked as if the object was being towed. So what that would tell you was that it wasn't a creature, it was something that was being pulled along to make it look like it was moving, basically, and to cause ripples. And analysis of the photograph also showed that the object wasn't gigantic at all. It was actually very small. It was only 2 to 3 feet long. So that right there tells you that if that is correct, that the most famous photograph of the Loch Ness Monster was really only a couple feet. It was most likely a model or like a toy of some sort. Basically, since that thing came out, since it aired in late 93, early 94, pretty much all the experts agree that the photo was a hoax. It was actually accused of being a fake long before that. On December 7th, 1975, a Sunday Telegraph article called it out as being a hoax. And there was a book that was published in 1999 called Nessie, the Surgeon's Photograph Exposed. And it contained a copy of that 1975 Sunday Telegraph article. And they stated there in the article that the creature was a toy submarine that was built by a guy named Christian Sperling, who was the son-in-law of Marmaduke Wetherell. Now, Wetherell had been publicly ridiculed by his employer, which just happened to be the Daily Mail. It was the newspaper that first published the photograph. And the reason that he had been ridiculed is because he had supposedly found Nessie footprints. So he had supposedly found footprints of the Loch Ness Monster. And he tried to get them covered by the paper, and they did an investigation. And they realized that these footprints were actually a hoax, that they weren't real. So they ridiculed him publicly, and that pissed him off. So basically, to get revenge on the Daily Mail, the theory is that Wetherill decided he was going to do a hoax with Sperling, who was a sculpture specialist, and his son Ian, and somebody named Maurice Chambers, which is an insurance agent. Now, they bought the toy submarine from F.W. Woolworths, and they made the head and the neck that you see in the picture from wood putty. There was actually a test done in a local pond for the show where they built a model that looked just like the one in the picture, and it was built to scale of what they say that the thing was in the picture. And they took it to that pond, and they towed it, and they took pictures. And they were able to perfectly recreate the famous surgeon photo. So what they say happened was exactly that. They say that they built this model, and they pulled it by a string or a rope or something, and then they took pictures of it. And they tried to pretend that this thing was the Loch Ness Monster. Now, right after they got done taking the pictures, they heard somebody coming up and approaching, which is they said they heard a water bailiff, which basically is a guy that is kind of like in charge there, that wanders around and makes sure everything's okay. He's almost like a game warden here in America. And they heard a water bailiff approaching, and when they heard him coming, Duke Wetherill actually stepped on the model and sank it down under the water with his feet and mushed it into the mud of the loch. And presumably it is still buried there in the mud of Loch Ness. And I would like to see somebody actually go and find it. That would be very interesting to me, to have it actually discovered. Because if somebody could discover that toy submarine and that model that's still buried in that mud, then they could prove definitively once and for all that it's a complete and total fake. Because see, nobody ever admitted that the surgeon photo was a fake, that it was a hoax in any way. They never had anybody admit that. What you have here is you have people that have tried to debunk the photograph, and they're saying this is what happened, this is what they've proven. Now, they say that Chambers gave the photograph to the plates of the photograph to Wilson, and Wilson brought the plates to a chemist who gave them to George Morrison to get developed. And then once they were developed, he sold the photos to the Daily Mail, or at least he sold the one that everybody knows to the Daily Mail. And then the Daily Mail came out publicly and announced that the Loch Ness Monster had been photographed. So what they're basically saying is that they believe that it was all I don't know if I want to call it a practical joke, but it was a way of getting revenge on the Daily Mail for ridiculing him publicly and making him look like a fool, basically. That's what I get from this. So the next one is actually a film that was taken in 1938, May 29th, 1938. There was a South African tourist named G.E. Taylor, and he actually saw something in the loch and he filmed it, and it's a 3-minute film that he filmed on 16mm color film. The film was actually obtained by popular science writer Maurice Burton, who did not show it to the other researchers. So he got the film, he didn't show it to anybody else. But he did publish a single frame from the film in his 1961 book, The Elusive Monster. According to him, he concluded that the object in the film was not an animal, but it was a floating object. Once again, this is a case where we don't know how he came to that conclusion. We don't know what his analysis consisted of. We don't know what kind of experiments were done to come to that conclusion. There is no real evidence there. We just have some guy that wrote a book saying this is what it is. It's not an animal, it's a floating object. But I have no information that tells me how he came to that conclusion. On August 15th, 1938, a chief constable of Irvine-shire named William Fraser wrote a letter that the monster existed beyond a shadow of a doubt. And he expressed concern about a hunting party that had arrived there at the loch. And this hunting party had made a custom-made harpoon gun, and they claimed that they were going to capture the monster. Whether they had to kill it or bring it in alive didn't matter. They were going to get the monster once and for all. And basically what he wanted to do was to protect the monster from the hunters, but he didn't believe that he was going to be able to do that. So he decided he was going to release this letter. Okay, now we're going to get a little bit more into the modern era. And this is one from 1954, in December of 1954. This has to do with sonar readings. There was a fishing boat named the Rival 3, and it actually did sonar readings on Loch Ness. This has been done multiple times since 1954. And they found that there was a large object that was traveling under the water of the loch, and it was keeping pace with their boat at a depth of 479 feet. They actually had sonar pings from it for 2,600 feet before they lost contact. And then after they lost contact, they regained contact for a short amount of time and they lost it again. So basically this creature was traveling almost 500 feet down in the loch, and it followed the boat for over 2,500 feet before it broke away and went somewhere else. They had tried to do sonar readings before that point, but they came back either inconclusive or negative for any pings. But in 1954, they actually got a ping of a large creature. Now, we don't know for sure what that ping was. Okay? Sonar is a strange thing, because what it does is it bounces the signal off of an object, and then that signal bounces back, and then the sonar reads it. So sometimes when you have a very large object that is picked up on sonar, it is actually a whole lot of little objects bunched together. The Navy came across that problem all the time, where they would ping something they thought would be large, and it turned out to be a big school of fish, but it showed up as one solid object on sonar. I'm not saying that's what happened in 1954. It very well could have been the Loch Ness Monster that the sonar picked up. But we have to keep in mind that it could have also been a large swarm of fish that the sonar picked up. Usually you only see very large swarms of fish like that, like in the ocean, but in some deeper and bigger lakes, you will have that as well. And Loch Ness is not a small place. Loch Ness is extremely deep and extremely large. So it is possible that there are large schools of fish that are swimming around in Loch Ness, and it is possible that that could be what the sonar readings are. The next one is by Peter McNabb in 1955. He took a photograph of two long black humps in the water. And he didn't actually make the photograph public until 1957, when it appeared in Constant White's book about Nessie. On October 23rd of 1958, it was also published by the Weekly Scotsman. And there's been a lot of theories of what those things could be. Some people say that it was just a wave, basically. That you had a couple boats that were traveling close together, and it made a weird wave that looked like humps. Other people have said that it's wood pieces. Other people have said that it's wind ripples. There's been all kinds of theories on what it could be. But once again, to be fair, you have to understand that whenever a skeptic tries to disprove something like this, they always go to the same couple things that it could be. Now, that's not saying that it's not those things. That's the kind of cool thing about a mystery, is you just really don't know. But that's what the skeptics say, and I'm trying to give you both sides here of what the evidence is and then what the skeptics say about it. Although, to me, and this is just my personal opinion, it seems to me like if every time you try to disprove something, you just say the same thing, and when you look at it, it doesn't look like that, to me, that kind of hurts your credibility. You know what I mean? Like that sketch that I was talking about earlier. When the guy said, he was supposedly an expert, he's a zoologist, when he said that it looked like an otter, that's what it was. And then I look at the actual drawing, and there's no way in hell you can look at this thing and say it's an otter. You know what I mean? Just no thinking person would do that. So to me, that's like, okay, you're just trying to explain it away any way you can. You don't actually see an otter there. Nobody could see an otter there because it's not an otter. It's a dinosaur. So you're just trying to come up with any excuse you can. I kind of look at this one the same way. You got two black humps in the water. They're obviously two black humps, okay? It's not a wave. It's not a ripple. It's two objects in the water. Now, whether that is something that was created and put in the water, maybe it's fiberglass, maybe it's some kind of structure that was built and put in the water and then photographed, that's more believable than saying it's a wave, because when you look at it, it doesn't look like a wave. So I think that hurts these skeptics a lot, and at least in my view, is if you're going to try to explain something, be reasonable about it at least. You know, if something obviously looks like a dinosaur, don't call it an otter. If something looks like two humps in the water, don't tell me it's a wave, because I know damn well it's not a wave. You know what I mean? You can see it with your own eyes, it's not a wave. So that's why I say just kind of take it with a grain of salt when these guys are talking about these things. The next one is another film. It was by an aeronautical engineer named Tim Dindale. And he filmed a hump which left a wake crossing over Loch Ness. This was in 1960. Supposedly Dinsdale had went out looking for the Loch Ness Monster. And on the very final day of his search, he had this sighting. And he said that the creature was reddish in color and it had a blotch on its side. He said that when he got his camera together and got ready to take the picture, that the creature began to move and he was able to get a short amount of film. A lot of the experts say that the object in this film was most likely an animate object. So they're saying that it was something that was alive. Now you had the skeptics that are saying the same old things about it. Their most famous thing to say about this particular piece of film is that it was a man in a boat. Not a creature at all, but a man in a boat. And they claim that when you increase the contrast on the film, that you can plainly see that it's a man in a boat. In that documentary that Discovery did, the Loch Ness Discovered documentary, they did a digital enhancement of the Dinsdale film. And the person who enhanced the film noticed a shadow in the negative of the film, which you couldn't see once the film was developed. Now they enhanced and overlaid the frames, and what they found when they did that was the rear body of the creature that was underwater. So basically what that tells me is that you had what was visible above the water in the film, and then in the actual negative you had a shadow, and when they overlaid it and enhanced it, they saw that shadow that they saw in the negative was the body of the creature. So that is not a man in the boat, as the skeptics claim. That is a creature that has a body that is under the water. Now, the experts who examined this footage, now keep in mind, these people, these experts were trying to debunk this footage just like they debunked the other. So they weren't believers that were trying to find an excuse to show that the creature was real. It was exactly the opposite. They were skeptics that were trying to disprove this piece of footage, to say, no, this is all BS, it's not real. But what they ended up doing is showing that it was a real creature, because they showed the body that was under the water. And they were actually quoted as saying, one of the experts, "Before I saw the film, I thought the Loch Ness Monster was a load of rubbish. Having done the enhancement, I'm not so sure." So that's one of the people that actually did the enhancing of the film for the Discovery Channel documentary, who thought it was garbage, thought it was not a real creature, and now he's not so sure. He doesn't think that it was a hoax. The next one is another photograph that was taken May 21st, 1977 by Anthony Doc Shields. He went camping up there at the loch, and he took some of the clearest pictures of the monster. Now, a couple things that to me are a problem with Shields. Not necessarily the pictures, but with Shields himself. He is a magician and claims to be a psychic. Now, Shields claims that he didn't just happen upon the creature. He claims that he was actually able to summon the creature out of the water. And he says that the creature is actually an elephant squid, and that the long neck that you see in the photograph is actually the trunk of the squid, and that the white spot at the base of the neck is actually the squid's eye. And basically, when you look at the photograph, there's zero ripples. There's no ripples. So it's not a creature that has come up out of the water that's moving at all. It's something that's been sitting there for a while. And due to the lack of ripples, basically they declared that it was a hoax. And also because when you look at the picture, it just looks a little bit too staged, you know? And when you take into account that the guy is a magician and claims to be a psychic and all this kind of crap, then to me, it stinks. It doesn't smell like a real thing at all. It smells like a staged a hoax, basically. The next one is another video. May 26, 2007, a 55-year-old laboratory technician named Gordon Holmes videotaped what he said was, quote, a jet black thing about 14 meters, which is 46 feet long, moving fairly fast in the water. Now, a marine biologist at the Loch Ness 2000 Center had described this footage as among the best footage he had ever seen. And BBC Scotland actually broadcast the video on May 29th of 2007, which is 3 days after it was shot. STV News North Tonight aired the footage on the 28th of May, and they actually interviewed Holmes. Shine was also interviewed, who was the marine biologist. And once he was interviewed, he suggested that the footage was an otter, a seal, or a water bird. So here you have this guy that at first said that it was the best footage he had ever seen. And then a couple days later, when he goes on TV to be interviewed about it, he claims that it was an otter, a seal, or a water bird. So it's going right back to the same things that the skeptics always say about this. And to me, it's interesting that he changed his tune a little bit, you know? How do you go from saying this is the best footage I've ever seen to saying that you think it's an otter? You know what I mean? Within a couple days. To me, that makes no sense. The next one is another sonar image. This happened on August 24th of 2011. And a Loch Ness boat captain named Marcus Atkinson photographed a sonar image of a 4-foot 11-inch unidentified object, which seemed to follow his boat for 2 minutes, and it was at a depth of 75 feet. He ruled out the possibility of a small fish or a seal. Now, to be fair, in April 2012, a scientist from the National Oceanography Center said that the image is a bloom of algae or it's zooplankton. Now, to me, the size of this sonar image is the problem. It's 4 foot 11 inches, so it's just under 5 foot. Now, that's not saying it can't be the Loch Ness Monster, but if it is, then it must be a baby. You know what I mean? It must be a juvenile of this creature, which in a way would make sense, because if you have sightings of this thing going all the way back to the 6th century, then that tells you that this is not a single solitary supernatural creature. This is something that has to have a breeding population, you know what I mean, to stay alive that long. And it also goes to reason that if you have the same creature in Lake Champlain, Champ, and you have Ogopogo as well, and several other lake monsters that resemble Loch Ness Monster, if you have multiple of these creatures in multiple locations, then there must be more than one. That's just logical. So, in order for there to still be Loch Ness Monsters, then there has to be a breeding population of these creatures. There has to be enough of them to reproduce, create babies, which grow up, reproduce, create babies, etc., etc. So, a little 5-foot creature might be a baby, if it's a real thing. Or it could just be something else that he doesn't know what the sonar image is. Because remember, this is not a film, and it is not a photograph. it is a sonar image. So it's just sonar. So we don't know exactly what it is. The next one is George Edwards, who was a skipper, August 3rd, 2012. He published what he claimed was the most convincing Nessie photograph ever. He said he took the picture on November 2nd of 2011. Basically, the picture shows a hump sticking out of the water. He said that it was there for 5 or 10 minutes, and he took a picture of it. According to Edwards, the photograph was independently verified by a specialist and a group of U.S. military monster experts. So that just sounds kind of weird to me in the first place. Edwards reportedly spent 60 hours per week on the loch. He owns a boat called the Nessie Hunter 4, by the way. And basically, he takes tourists for rides on the lake to try to see the monster. He's been searching for the Loch Ness Monster for, he says, 26 years. And he says that, in his opinion, the Loch Ness Monster looks like a manatee, but it's not a mammal. He said when people see 3 humps, they're probably just seeing 3 separate monsters. Now, a lot of researchers have questioned this photograph's authenticity. Steve Feldman, who is a Nessie researcher, has suggested that what the object in the water actually is a fiberglass hump that was used in a National Geographic Channel documentary in which Edwards had actually participated in that documentary. And he claims that what happened was Edwards took that fiberglass hump from that documentary, put it into the water, and took a picture of it. Basically, he claims that it's a hoax. I don't know whether this thing is a hoax or not, but it does not fit with all of the other pictures of Nessie that we have. Because usually when you have pictures of just the humps, it's multiple humps, either 2 or 3. In this case, it's a single hump. So you have to ask yourself, is that a real picture? If something has a hump, you have to think it's not just like 3 bumps on its back. It's that the creature is swimming, it's diving or something like that, and it's bending its body, and that's what is making the hump shape. So you have to think physically, is it capable of just doing a single hump out of the water? That I don't know. I guess that would really depend on what the creature actually is. But most people agree that this picture is a hoax. The next one is a video by David Elder, which was taken on August 27th of 2013. He was a tourist, and he actually took a long video of the Loch Ness Monster. It's like a 5-minute video of this mysterious wave in the loch. And according to Elder, the wave was produced by a 15-foot solid black object that was just under the surface of the water. Now, he claims that he was taking a picture of a swan at the pier at the southwestern end of the loch, and he said that he saw movement. So he shot the movement. He said that the water was very still at the time and that there were no ripples coming off the wave and no other activity on the water. Skeptics have said that the wave was just a wind gust blowing over the water. It's interesting because in this whole 5-minute video, we never actually see the creature at all. All we see is the wave, you know? So to me, it's like in 5 minutes, you think you would get a better picture, you know? But maybe the creature never came up. Maybe it was just swimming under the water and all there was the wave to see. I don't know. But it is what it is. That's what the film is. The last one is from 2014. And this is a really interesting one because this is the first and, to my knowledge, really the only picture of Nessie ever taken from a satellite in space. And this was taken on April 19th of 2014. And it's from Apple Maps, believe it or not. Now, Apple Maps is a lot like Google Maps. Okay, it's just by Apple. A satellite image that was on Apple Maps showed what appeared to be a large creature, which a lot of people think is the Loch Ness Monster, just below the surface of Loch Ness. This was at the loch's far north side, and the image appeared to be about 98 feet long. once again, you have a lot of these explanations that come out about it, that they think it's the wake of a boat, but that you just couldn't see the boat for whatever reason, whether it was, you know, not in the picture, or that, you know, the contrast was weird on the picture, so you couldn't take the boat. But I mean, for me, I think it's a satellite image, right? So the contrast is going to be what it is. It's not like it's a camera that you're holding in your hand that light can affect or something like that. It's a satellite image. They also say that it was ripples caused by a seal or floating wood or whatever. I mean, there's a lot of different versions of what it could be from the skeptics. But to me, it's interesting because this was something taken by Apple Map Images, okay? This was a satellite image that was done by Apple. It is not something that some guy just took while he was out on the loch. Okay, so the idea of this particular image being a hoax is kind of far-fetched. Because it would be just like if you went onto Google Images, like Google Maps or whatever, or Google Earth is a better way to say it. If you went on Google Earth and you decided to zoom the camera down on Google Earth and capture an image of something, you would have to go through a hell of a lot of trouble to try to fake that. You know what I mean? That's not something that... How would you know when that thing's going to get zoomed in to catch that photograph? You know, what do you just set something up in the loch and just leave it there for weeks and just hope that it gets photographed by Apple Maps, who people at that time don't even really realize that it's taking pictures? You know what I mean? To me, it just doesn't seem like it's possible that was a hoax of any kind. Now, what exactly the image is, it's up for debate, because it's a large object underneath the water is what it is. You can't really tell if it is Loch Ness Monster or if it's, you know, like a sunken boat or just a really large tree. I mean, we don't really know because we can't see that well because it's underneath the water. But there is something large that was captured by the picture. So that's basically a lot of the photographic and film evidence of this creature. Now I think we'll try to talk about a little bit of what this thing might be. So, Old Boy, do you want to give your thoughts first on what you think this creature might be?
You're also forgetting that they thought it was dead for a couple years, and they just had a sighting of it May 17th. On May 2nd, they have a video of it again coming out. They have a new one. I was looking at it, and I think it's a plesiosaur. That's my opinion. I think Champ is too. There's been so many sightings of this thing. I mean, there's always going to be hoax. We all know that. The 1933, you know, picture, I believe that's fake. I believe that he faked that. You could tell it's fake. But some of the other ones, like you were just talking about, the Google Map one, I looked at that. The problem is they had a picture of a boat that actually they could tell was a boat, and it was half the size, and you could tell the boat was making waves, and this thing was underwater. It had flippers. So whatever this is, it may not just be the Loch Ness Monster in there. You know, there may be bigger things in there that we don't know. Remember, a lot of people got to realize the loch's like, what, about 755 feet to 800 feet deep, and they're saying there's a crack in it might even go deeper than that. This is a very deep lake. But the problem is you can't really see other than 2 feet. Once you jump in the water, it's like murky and dark. And they do have big surgeon fish in there that grow about 8-9 feet. So that's what they think Nessie is anyway. But I believe it's a plesiosaur. It just, everything points to that way. I mean, look, even with Champ, I think Champ's the same thing. It's freshwater. You know, Scott, this lake's really big. It's huge. It's it's bigger than most oceans. No, I wouldn't say that, but it's really big. It's huge. Why wouldn't there be something in there? I mean, it's almost impossible. If all these people have seen something, you're right. You're always going to have your people saying it's going to be a wave or a wake or some kind of otter or birds, and that's a bunch of crap. Because you know what? Here's the problem. When they did the video of Champ, they followed that thing. You could see there's something that's 20 feet long swimming on the water. That's it. It made it believe so much as the Canadian police made it illegal to hunt Champ. And there's been people who've actually seen him on foot on land that comes out to plesiosaur. So I totally think it is a plesiosaur. The only thing is, I really hope they never find it because I know what will happen. See, like this is like this is like one of my favorite stories, and I loved how James told all the information. But in reality, I really hope they never find this thing because you know what they're going to do. They're probably going to kill it and take it apart and see what it is, like they always do. But I think there's more than one. I think there's a family of them. That's why, and I think there's more than just in Loch Ness the Loch Ness Lake. I think there's some in other places too. That's why you see so many different creatures. So that's my opinion. I really believe it is a plesiosaur. I don't know. What do you think, James?
I have a few problems with the theory of it being a plesiosaur. Now, the first of which, and all of these are going to rely just on what paleontologists believe about the plesiosaur. So you have to take these objections or these problems that I have with it with a grain of salt because we don't know for sure, okay? I'll say that up front. But paleontologists believe that the plesiosaur, first of all, it existed long before Loch Ness. Okay, Loch Ness wasn't always landlocked. It opened up to the ocean at one time. And it was completely frozen under ice for like 20,000 years. So the time frame is a big problem for me for it being a plesiosaur. That's the first part. Is supposedly plesiosaurs weren't around in the time that Loch Ness finally thawed out to where something could get into it. Now, that being said, they're not always right about that. Okay, this is the least of my objections because that can very easily be overcome because they believe that the coelacanth was extinct for millions of years and they found one within the last 50 years or something, right? Off the coast of Madagascar. So they're not always right about that. So I will say that with a definite grain of salt is that's the first problem. But that is only if the plesiosaur actually went extinct when they say it did. But their track record is not very good there. So it is possible that if this thing survived, it could have got into the loch. But the other problem I have with the plesiosaur, and the main problem I have, they also say that it couldn't raise its neck up the way that the Loch Ness Monster does. But they're basing that off of partial fossilized remains. They don't have full skeletons to tell you, so I don't put much stock into that. But my main problem with the idea of it being a plesiosaur is, from everything we know and understand about the plesiosaur, it breathed air. Okay? So if this thing breathes air, it's got to come up for air. And when it comes up for air, it's going to have to do that even if it can hold its breath for a crazy amount of time. Okay? Like some creatures that live in the ocean that actually breathe air, like whales and stuff, they can hold their breath for a long, long time. Some species and some animals, hours and hours before they have to come back up, right? But even if that's the case, let's say that this thing can even hold its breath for 6 hours at a time, which probably isn't the case, but let's pretend that that is. Even with that being said, that means at least 4 times a day this thing's got to come up for air. Now, if you have to have a breeding population in this lake. Okay, in the loch there has to be enough creatures to continually reproduce for there to be sightings going all the way back to the 1800s. Okay, so that means you have a lot of these creatures in this lake, which means each individual creature has to come up for air at least 4 times a day. Most likely, with the majority of creatures that live in water that breathe air, the upper end of their ability to hold their breath is usually anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour. Okay, that's most creatures. Now, you have a couple exceptions that can go a lot longer. But if that's the case, let's say it's an hour, you're talking 24 times a day, each one of these creatures has to come up to take a breath. Now, since the 30s, Loch Ness Monster has been super popular. And people have been looking for this thing all over the place on the loch. Now, if you have a breeding population of this creature that is coming up every hour for air, so you're talking dozens of these things at least, coming up for air every hour, there would have been a lot more pictures, a lot more film. They would have definitely proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that this thing exists, because we would have seen it. You know, when we look at things like dolphins and whales, we see them all the time because they have to come up for air. You know, the same thing would be true of the Loch Ness Monster if it was a plesiosaur, because it would have to come up for air. And it was so large that it's not like it's something you're going to miss. You know what I mean? When that thing comes up for air, you're going to know it. And a lot of these pictures that we get are just little humps or, you know, something moving around under the water. You don't really have any real photographs of this thing up out of the water. You know, you had the surgeon photograph, but that's a hoax, most likely. So you don't have any really good footage of this thing coming up out of the water to take a breath. All you have is humps. So what that tells me most likely of what this thing is some kind of sea creature that can breathe under the water. It doesn't have to come up for air. And what you're actually seeing is it just coming up near the surface to feed on whatever it feeds on. And you'll see like the hump of its back or tail or something like that as it gets near the surface, and when it starts to dive back down, that's when you'll see the humps as it goes back under the water, or you'll just see a large object underneath the water. But see, those sonar images are another problem for me when you're talking plesiosaur, because the one was like 475 feet, right? And the other one was 75 feet. That I mentioned. There's been a whole lot of different sonar things done on the lake, but those are the two most prominent that had the best readings. Now, on both of those, you're talking about a deep, deep object, okay? 75 feet, not so much. For 75 feet, to me, that's believable that a creature that breathes air could potentially be that deep and then come back up. But when you're talking about 500 feet deep that they ping this thing at, for me, that's a little bit unbelievable that a creature that relies on oxygen to breathe from the air would go down and hang out for a long period of time at 500 feet deep. You know what I mean? I would think that an air-breathing creature would be a little bit closer to the surface most times, because it doesn't want to be trapped way, way down there and then can't breathe and it's got to come up. You know what I mean? So those are a couple of problems I have with the idea of a plesiosaur. Also, if you put any stock into the sightings that were on land from the people that say they saw this thing crossing the road, if it's a plesiosaur, there is absolutely no way that's going to happen. Okay, first of all, they said that the thing didn't have limbs, that it just kind of lurched its way across the road. Now, a plesiosaur has very pronounced limbs. It has very long, flowing arms and legs that end in gigantic flipper-looking things, okay? So there's no way you're missing those arms and legs. And there's also no way that this thing is going to get up and move across the road. You know, this thing is going to stay in the water. That's what it's designed for, is to be in the water. There's no accounts in history of plesiosaurs operating on land. They were always found in the water. So if you put any kind of stock into that, you know, of the fact that this thing is sighted on land, then to me that rules out plesiosaur. Now, the thing about a plesiosaur is, man, a plesiosaur fits the damn description perfect, don't it? I mean, it looks exactly like what you think the Loch Ness Monster should look like. You know, from everything that we've heard about the Loch Ness Monster, that plesiosaur fits it to a T. So what I think it probably is on a lot of the old maps that sailors back way, way long ago would make of the oceans, they would always put sea monsters on there. Now, a lot of people thought that this was just mythology, or scary sea tales. But there have been a lot of accounts in a lot of the ship's logs about running into sea creatures, and sea monsters as they called them. And if you actually go back and you read a lot of these accounts, a lot of those sea monsters that they talk about, they kind of match the description of Nessie as well, and Champ and Ogopogo and all of them. they kind of fit really well in with that description. So what I'm thinking might have happened, and this is not based on anybody else, this is just my personal theory. I think that potentially, since Loch Ness was at one time open to the ocean, okay, and I believe Lake Champlain, the same thing. At one point in history, that was open to the ocean as well. So, like through waterways that connected. So, if you have something that is open at one time to the ocean, I think some of these creatures, whatever the sea monster creatures are, I'm not sure what they are, but there's a lot of things that are in the ocean that we don't understand or know about yet. Because the ocean's a very big place, very deep, and we don't know much about it. So, I think that one of these creatures that there are all these eyewitness accounts of sailors running into during their travels. Even people as well known as like Columbus. In one of his ship's logs, he talks about seeing a sea monster. I think one of these things swam into the loch when it was still open to the ocean. Found that there was really good, eating there, that it had plenty of fish to eat. And I guess it couldn't have just been one creature. It had to be a couple at least. And they swam into the loch, and they decided they were going to hang there because it was, a good place. There wasn't nothing trying to kill them or eat them, and they had food. And then when the loch became landlocked to where it was no longer open to the ocean, they just kind of became trapped there. And they just kept on doing what animals do. They kept eating and breeding and increasing their number, and that is how the breeding population exists, and that's how the creature is still around. I think most likely it's something along those lines. I don't think that Loch Ness is some supernatural creature, because being a supernatural creature would explain why it's been around for so long. But if it was a supernatural creature, I don't think that there'd be more than one of them. You know what I mean? I think that it would be just Loch Ness Monster. There wouldn't be Champ, there wouldn't be Ogopogo, there wouldn't be any of these other ones. It would just be Nessie. But because you see this creature in different places, and because you see varying sizes of this creature, that tells me that there's a breeding population, and it tells me that it's a biological creature. Now, it is not out of the realm of possibility that this is some creature from the era of dinosaurs that has survived. I believe that the sea monsters that the sailors used to talk about, I believe they're probably some form of dinosaur from that time period that lived in the ocean that was able to survive. Because keep in mind, whatever killed the dinosaurs didn't kill everything. A lot of things survived. You have creatures from that time period that are still around today. Like the crocodile, like the alligator, like the sea turtle. There's a lot of creatures in the ocean. Yeah, there's all kinds of sharks. There's a lot of creatures in the ocean that are still around, that were around in that time period. Actually, the majority of creatures in the ocean are still around that were in that time period. You know what I mean? Not a whole lot of them died off. And the ones that we know of that died off, we're really not even sure that they died off. We just haven't seen them in a while. But when you're talking about an ocean that goes miles deep, and some of the things that are down in the bottom of that ocean, we don't even know what the hell's down there. Every time we take a submersible sub down there, we see all kinds of cool stuff we've never seen before. So the idea that we know all about the ocean, and the idea that these things don't exist because we would know it if they did, is kind of silly when you're talking about the ocean. Because it really is the final frontier. We have not explored the ocean very well at all. We've been around the top of the ocean, and even as much as we've traveled on top of the ocean, there are still islands out there we haven't discovered yet that we find. So down deep in the ocean, we don't really know much about at all. So the idea that some of these things could actually still be around is very possible. And I think most likely that's what Nessie is some kind of sea creature that made its way into the loch and became stuck there when it was closed off to the ocean. And I think most likely it was one of those sea monsters, that they always talked about. And to me, to me, the sea monsters always resembled dragons to me. You know what I mean? And in a way, Nessie kind of almost resembles a dragon a little bit to me. Because if you really think about what a dragon is, I mean, that's what it looks like, right? I mean, take away the whole fire-breathing thing, take away the whole flying thing. Just look at the dragon as a biological creature. Look at what it looks like. It looks like a dinosaur, doesn't it? It looks like what Nessie could possibly look like. So maybe it's some form of like a sea dragon, like a sea monster thing that made its way into the loch. I mean, that's my theory on what it is.
I like that theory. It could be that too. It could be some kind of sea monster because, you know, let's not forget they said the giant squid didn't exist, and they have video of it now down in the ocean, about 70, 80 feet long squid. They also said the mastodon shark didn't exist, and they might have video of a shark at 60 feet long. So just remember that. So it's not impossible, and over through time, and this is supposed to be gone around for 1,500 years, it's been the same creature. So back then, I can understand now when people are trying to do myths and stories, but this thing's been around for 1,500 years. It's kind of hard. It's not like, you know, the chupacabra about 20 years, 30, 40 years, whatever. You know, this thing's been seen for over 1,500 years and even longer. So, I mean, and different places. See, that's the weird thing about this. This isn't just at one place. When I was looking up on the internet, there's been about 100 different sightings from different creatures, and they're all different looking too. You know, and that's the other thing. Like the Ongo Poingo, it supposedly has a horse's head, and it's green. It doesn't even look like Nessie. So they don't all look the same. So that's the other weird thing about this. So what I think is, I agree with the one story. We can both agree on that. I think a school of them found a good, you know, fishing place, or where they had a good fishing, you know. But you also got to remember, it turned into fresh water from salt water. So they could have adapted. That's not necessarily impossible, because you remember they can evolve, and that could have happened. So these are just a different form of these creatures.
Yeah, I mean, but not only that, but also it could have just been a creature that could do both. You know, I mean, you have examples of that in nature now, like the bull shark, for example. The bull shark lives out in the ocean, which is saltwater, but it is perfectly comfortable coming inland into the river systems. I mean, there was that whole thing in New Jersey where there was multiple attacks by bull sharks in the river, and some of them up to like 100, 150 miles inland in the river systems, where the bull sharks traveled from they think it was one or two bull sharks, traveled from the ocean up the river, and they got like 100 miles inland and was attacking people that were swimming in the river, you know? So you have examples of exactly what you're saying in species of animals today that can do both, you know what I mean? And the shark that you're talking about was the megalodon shark. And one really quick thing about the megalodon shark, I know that's not what the show is on. I want to do a show on the megalodon shark one day. I think that'll be interesting. But one neat thing about that is they thought that thing was extinct for a long time. Now, what the megalodon shark was the largest shark ever. I mean, they have a set of these things, jaws and teeth, in a museum, and a man can stand inside of it, and he looks tiny, like a little toy soldier. You know, he looks very, very small compared to this gigantic mouth. And this thing fed on like whales and stuff. And the interesting thing is, like Old Boy was saying, they think that they might still be around now. They had said that they were completely extinct, but they think that they might be around because not only do they think they might have evidence of it, but there was a whale that washed up on a beach, and it had a huge bite taken out of it. And when they measured the radius of the bite, and they tried to compare it to everything on record to figure out what the hell took a bite out of this thing, because it was gigantic, it actually matched perfectly the bite radius of the megalodon shark. So they're thinking that possibly these things still exist out there in the ocean, and they just didn't know it. And to me, that's a terrifying thought, because when you have a shark that feeds on whales, I mean, that thing could take out a boat if it wanted to, you know? Think about that. If you're out there on a small boat, I mean, that thing could bite the boat right in half if it wanted to. You know, I don't know why exactly it would want to, but if it did, I mean, you're toast, you know? So I'd definitely like to do a show at some point in the future on the Megalodon shark, because it's just a fascinating creature anyway. But I just wanted to get that out there while I was thinking about it, brother. Go ahead.
I also believe there's sea serpents too. I believe there's giant, giant creatures, because they have pitch, and these things are really long, 200-300 feet. I believe they belong. I believe they do exist in the ocean. It's not impossible, but we just don't see them because we have, we only explore 10%, 15% of the ocean. How the hell do we know what's in the ocean? Not everybody knows what's in there. That's not impossible. The ocean goes thousands of feet deep. We don't like 10,000 feet in certain parts. So I mean, that's not impossible. I wouldn't doubt that. I wouldn't doubt some of these things exist. I say some of it's hoax. We all know that. But like I said, do you really want them to exist because you know what's going to happen? See, like I said, it's always got that romantic part of it. I love to have these animals exist, but I know what's going to happen. Somebody's going to try to kill it, and that's what I don't want. And that's kind of why I think they do exist, but I hope they don't, because everybody's got to want to ruin everything. You know how that goes, James. They want to find something, just like Bigfoot. People want to try to kill them. That's why I hope they never find them, because of that. And that's the part I always think about. I'm like, if they ever find these creatures, like the giant squid, that was one thing. But if they find something like this, they're going to kill it. And that's what I'm worried about. And it's going to suck. So, I kind of worry about that part, but I really do believe they exist. I mean, I think we both agree. I don't know what it is. It could be a couple theories, like you said. A couple of these creatures got away and turned into something else, and that could happen. And when you were saying you don't believe this is a magical creature, there's lore on what the Loch Ness Monster is. Some say it is a magical creature. Some people say Aleister Crowley was around that area, was doing a lot of spells. And that's a theory too. That's a theory that Aleister Crowley brought that creature on, and you said it was in the 18 and 1900s. But I don't believe that. I've heard that story before. But I believe Nessie exists. I don't know what it is, though. I really don't want to sit here. I don't know what I could think it is. It could be a plesiosaur. It could be some kind of relative to that. It could be a giant, whale. Some people think it's a giant whale, a new species of whale. That's another theory. It could be a whole new species of some kind of animal. What do you think about that one?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. If it's something that is from the ocean that came in, it could be something we haven't even discovered yet. Now we're just kind of looking at this as a biological creature right now. But the interesting thing is that, like you said, there is lore on what this thing could possibly be. And some people think that the Loch Ness Monster is actually a Kelpie. Because in the beginning of the sightings and the lore on the Loch Ness Monster, it looked a little bit different than it does now. And I thought it was very interesting when you were talking about how Ogopogo supposedly has like a horse head, because in the original legends of the Loch Ness Monster that go way, way back, the description of it, some of the people described it as having a horse-like head. And they associate it with the legends of the Kelpie, which the Kelpie was like a aquatic horse-like creature. And they would basically like come up out of the water and grab you and pull you in and like eat you. You know what I mean? So there is lore on the Loch Ness Monster that is associated with the lore on the Kelpie. And maybe we'll do a show someday on the Kelpie and everything like that when we have more time and really get into that legend as well. But I just thought that was very interesting when you brought up the Ogopogo thing, because it kind of ties in with the original lore of this creature, of what it was in the beginning. You know what I mean? Before all the photographs and before it kind of evolved into what it is now. Now, I don't exactly know why it evolved into what it is now, or why it started off the way it did. I think most likely what you have here is a case of different creatures getting stuck in different bodies of water. Ogopogo, like Old Boy said, is not described as exactly the same as what Loch Ness is now. I think originally when people saw this thing in Loch Ness, they probably identified it as a Kelpie. So they described it the way you would describe a Kelpie. You know what I mean? They saw something and said, oh my God, what is that? It's some kind of aquatic monster. It must be a Kelpie, right? So, see, people nowadays don't really know what a Kelpie is. People nowadays don't really know what a lot of these creatures are anymore, because that lore is not passed on anymore. I mean, it's really a dying art of knowing a lot of what these creatures are and what they did and what they looked like and all that kind of stuff. That's one of the reasons why we like to do shows like this. And like when we did the show on the Kappa, you know, a while ago. I try to do shows like that with Old Boy because we try to pass on a little bit of that knowledge that is kind of forgotten. It's kind of becoming a thing of the past where people just don't know it anymore, you know? And it wasn't always that way. Back hundreds of years ago, people were a lot more familiar with a lot of this lore because they really believed that these creatures existed. You know, I'm not talking just about Kelpie. I'm talking about all the different lore creatures. They really believed in werewolves and vampires and all these things. They believed that they existed on Earth and that they were a danger to them. So people were taught this lore as children because it was a way of warning them and letting them know, hey, this is dangerous. This is here and it's dangerous. The same way that we teach our children about snakes or bears or whatever the threat in your area is, you make sure that your children know about it and what to do if they see one and all that kind of stuff. That's the way it was a couple hundred years ago with a lot of this lore, is people really pass that information on to their children. But as time progressed, we kind of moved away from that and we just don't teach each other that stuff anymore. Now, I'm not saying that's a good or bad thing. I personally, I think you ought to know the lore, because what if you run into one of these kind of things? You know what I mean? And then you have no idea. But there are a lot of people now that they don't even believe that any of this stuff exists, so who knows? But back then they did. So I think most likely what happened in the beginning was they saw something. They didn't know what it was. It's rather impressive looking and intimidating looking. So they say it's a monster. So in their mind, they think aquatic monster. They equate that with Kelpie. So when they describe it, maybe they didn't get a very good look at it, but they know what a Kelpie is supposed to look like, so they describe it as that. I think most likely that is what happened. You know what I mean? Now, in the case of Ogopogo, I think that might be a different creature than the Loch Ness Monster. You know what I mean? I think it's the same basic kind of creature, but it might be a little bit different. It might be a different species of creature. It might just be a different version of that species of creature. Who knows? But I think that's where the original Loch Ness Monster descriptions come from, is from the lore. They saw something and said, this is what it has to be, so this is what it's supposed to look like. I think that would explain why Nessie has changed over the years in what people think that it looks like. Now, in the case of Ogopogo, it hasn't really changed. People are still describing it the same way. But that might be because there are nowhere near as many actual sightings of Ogopogo as there is sightings of Nessie. Ogopogo is more legend status than it is something that they know is there and has seen a bunch of times, where Nessie has been just, I mean, thousands of sightings. I mean, I don't know, 5,000, 10,000 people have seen this thing. Now, you don't have that many photos of it or film of it. When I went over the stuff in the beginning, I was trying just to handle the best, you know, the photographs and the film and the best accounts of it. But there are just thousands and thousands and thousands of sightings of Nessie. And I don't think you have that with Ogopogo. I think it's a much more elusive creature there. It hasn't been seen near as many times. And I think when something isn't seen as many times, it's very easy for it to stay in legend status and not have a realistic description of it. You know what I mean? It doesn't have to update to the new version of a biological creature of what it actually is, because there's not many people actually getting a look at it to describe it. You know what I mean? I mean, maybe I'm off base there. I mean, what do you think, old boy? Do you think that holds water?
I think you're totally right. That's how I think. I think they're all pretty similar creatures. The only difference is I think some of them are a little different, and I think some of them are not even the same creature. You know, like you were saying, I think the one kind of looks like that. We got to do a show about that anyway. I got to agree with you. I don't see no. I think people have changed it though, what it looks like to make it get. You also got to remember, I think people made it, look this certain way, so people would go and check it out, and go see if it's real. So they made it more appealing, because you're not going to chase after something that's ugly. If you see what they did, like Epcot Center, that's when I first saw Nessie. They made a movie, and they made him, cute, like the water horse. You seen that movie, The Water Horse?
Yeah.
That's pretty much what they made, Nessie really cute at the beginning, and then turns into this giant horse-looking monster. But it's actually it's really a good. There's only one exist, but I think they made it sound like that so people will go, spend money to go look at it, because it brings money. That's what it all comes down to. Is I say there's something in this lake, well, millions of people are going to want to see this, so I make it look like a certain way, so that's what people are looking for. When it could be opposite of what the hell they're looking for in the first place. So, if you look at that picture that Apple shows, that's a different kind of creature than what you're seeing regularly, what they think it is, a plesiosaur. It doesn't even look like that, but it's huge. It's like 96 feet tall, long, you said. So, I mean, it's crazy. It could be something else. It could be a whole different thing than what we think it is.
I think that's the magical thing about all of this, and not just with Nessie, but with a lot of these cryptic creatures, is we don't know, and that's the beauty of it. That's what makes it fun and exciting for me and interesting, is because it's a mystery that needs to be solved. You know what I mean? And it's a lot of fun. And I don't know, we're coming up on like an hour and a half of this show, so we'll be ending soon. But what I think that I'm going to do is, on the YouTube channel, I think I'm going to start to do a series of videos. We're still going to do the Staring into the Abyss show, because we love this show, and we're going to do in-depth shows about all these different kinds of creatures. But I think that I'm also going to do a series of videos on these creatures that are shorter videos, and I'm going to try to pass on some of that lore knowledge that just isn't passed on anymore. Stuff that parents used to tell their children, and then their children would tell their children when they got older, and all that kind of stuff. It was passed on. That kind of information, I'm going to try to make shorter videos for the YouTube channel that are on all these different kinds of creatures. Now, it's not going to be the same as when we do the creatures on Staring into the Abyss, because on Staring into the Abyss, we try to examine all the evidence, and we kind of give you both sides, and we try to decide if we think these things are real or not. I think what I'm going to do for this short video series, and I may have Old Boy joining me on some of them, is I'm just going to try to just give you the lore straight up. I'm not going to give you any opinion on the lore. I'm not going to say skeptics say this or science proves this. I'm not going to treat it like an unsolved mystery or an unsolved case that I'm trying to solve. I'm just going to give you what the lore states about the creature. What it looks like, what it eats, what it does, if it's dangerous or not, if it can kill you, if it will attack you, and how you kill it. I think that would be very interesting information and useful information if you ever run into any of these things, is how you actually kill them if you need to. I want to try to pass some of that information on, and I think that would be a good way to do it, because some of these creatures like Nessie or Bigfoot or the Kappa, or some of the werewolves, vampires, some of the things we've done on Staring into the Abyss, there is a hell of a lot of information to talk about. So we can do it on the show. It's fine. It works really well. But some of these creatures, there's very little lore on them. So it's really not enough to fill an entire, hour or two show. So we haven't done them on Staring Into the Abyss because you just can't do it, because we'd have to do so many of them to fill a show. So I think what I'll do is I'll start taking some of these creatures and I'll do smaller videos on them that will be like an addition to the Staring Into the Abyss show. Does that make sense? Like Staring Into the Abyss presents the lore of whatever. And we'll try to get some of those banged out over the next couple months or whatever. When I have time, I'll try to make some of these videos. And I think that'll be a very interesting thing to be able to pass on some of this information. And you guys can share them around and, you know, whatever. I don't care. I mean, all this stuff on the YouTube channel is completely free for you. We put it there so that you can enjoy it and, you know, learn some stuff from it and just listen whenever you want. So please take advantage of that. And I think that'll be a very cool thing to do. And we'll try to do that. Old boy, do you have any shout outs or anything like that before we go, brother?
Just thanks for listening, guys. It's awesome to do these shows with you guys. You know, we like to find out a lot of information. Like this, you could do shows for a week about Nessie. There's so much information. That's why this show went so long. We on just Nessie, we were going to do about other lake monsters. We talked a little bit about them, but Nessie just takes a lot. There's so much stuff on Nessie. So, but thank you guys. Thank all our listeners. Shout out to all of the people who've been on the shows, past and future. And love your life and have a good night, guys. Love you all. Demon Hunters, Sugar Ladies, and Misfits. Have a good night.
What's funny about it too, bro, is that we only really scratched the surface of Nessie. And I mean, we talked for an hour and a half. We put out a ton of information about Nessie. And we just barely scratched the surface. I mean, we could literally do another 5 shows, I think, on Nessie if we wanted to, and really dig into it if we wanted. Maybe we will someday. Nessie's a great subject. I love Nessie a whole bunch. I've always been fascinated with the idea of the Loch Ness Monster and trying to figure out just what in the hell this thing actually is. You know, because I believe that there's something there. I don't exactly know what it is. I mean, I gave my theory. I think that's probably the most likely. But until we really have a body to examine, I think we're not going to know. You know, and that's the sad part and, you know, the interesting part about the whole thing. I mean, because I actually hope that these things do exist. Not because I want one to be killed, but just I really love that whole magical idea of all of these creatures that we don't know actually existing. You know, to me, that makes the world a much better place. I love that idea. And I'm a guy that really believes in a lot of those things that go bump in the night. I believe that a lot of these things actually exist. Some I've seen, some I haven't seen. Some I have interviewed people that swear up and down they've seen, and some of these people have been very, very reputable people. They're not crackpots. They're not, you know, people that are flaky in any way. They're doctors, lawyers, scientists, people that have reputations to worry about. So they're not just going to make up some nonsense story. And I don't know, I've seen enough in my lifetime to really believe that a lot of these things exist. And I've done a lot of extensive study of the lore of a lot of these different things. And it's something that has been a lifelong love and passion for me, and I'm sure for Old Boy as well. We're a couple guys that have loved this stuff since we were children, you know? And now I'm in a position where I can do this show and I can take this lifetime of knowledge that I've accumulated and kind of disseminate it to everybody else. You know, anybody who's interested can, you know, go to the channel and watch it completely free and just check it out and enjoy it. And just share that love of the unknown with us, you know? That's kind of the cool thing about the title of the show, Staring Into the Abyss, because in a way you're almost saying also we're kind of staring into the unknown, you know what I mean? We like to examine these things that most people are either too afraid to talk about or they just dismiss as not being real, you know? But if you really dig into a lot of these things, man, you find that there's a nugget of truth there. In almost every one of these legends, there's a nugget of truth. And it's about weeding through the nonsense and getting to the truth of the matter. You know, and that's something that really drives me. I want to find the answer to all these questions. I really do. And I put a lot of time and effort and work into researching and trying to find these answers. And it's fun for us to do the show. It's fun for us to talk about it. And hopefully it's fun for you guys to listen to it. So if you enjoyed it, hit like, subscribe to the channel, check out our other shows. Like I said before, they're all there 100% free for you so that you can enjoy them. And just thank you guys for tuning in. We love you very, very much. We appreciate you so much. And until we speak again, love many, trust few, and do harm to none. Bye-bye.